Welcome to Comment with me, George Galloway, here on Press TV. Still the voice of the voiceless. Comment is the big conversation, the great debate, but it can only be either of those if you join in. That's why, above all, I need your telephone calls. The number to ring is 44208-601-4555. You call us, we'll call you back. Establish a clear line, and remember, if you get on the television with me, the volume on your television has to be down at 0, or I'll have to press swiftly on, because no one will understand either of us. Or you can SMS me on 447800008066. The best SMSs come up here on the comment wall. Similarly with emails. You can email me at comment@presstv.co.uk, and you can even tweet me at the normal Twitter address. And they'll all come up here if they warrant it. Tonight, we're dealing with two subjects. The first is Israel. I'm asking, is Israel getting away with murder? You couldn't get a more clear question, and frankly, it's difficult to argue, I think, with my answer. But if you'd like to, please try. Israel has once again, this week, gotten away with cold-blooded murder. The Mavi Marmara, the Turkish aid ship filled with people of goodwill and high reputation from all over the world, was attacked by the Israeli Navy and Air Force in high seas, in international waters. That's a very key point. It wasn't in waters claimed by Israel. It was in international waters. In the dead of night, helicopters and naval vessels closed in on this aid ship, which was filled with humanitarian aid and people of goodwill. And 9 were murdered in cold blood. They were shot down dead. Unarmed people were shot down and killed. It was as clear a case of international piracy. If it had happened off the coast of Somalia, no one would have had any doubt that murder most foul had been carried out by pirates, red in tooth and claw. But because Israel did it, all these years later now, they still haven't paid for it. And they haven't paid the people they kidnapped. Colleagues of mine, close colleagues of mine, were taken to an Israeli prison camp in the desert. Their clothes were stolen. Their computers were stolen. Their phones were stolen. Their money was stolen, much of which turned up for sale in markets in Jerusalem within days. They were traumatized by seeing their colleagues shot down dead beside them. And what's happened? Well, this week, a group of international prosecutors, considering whether Israel should be charged with war crimes for the attack on the Mavi Marmara, have concluded that there weren't enough people killed for it to be a war crime. A novel interpretation of law, you might imagine. If you kill one person, it's a murder. If you kill 9 people, it's not even a crime, at least so far as international justice is concerned. Now, of course, 9 people on a Turkish aid ship is, if you'll forgive the pun, a drop in the ocean compared to the mass killing of thousands of people just this year, this summer, in Gaza, and every other year in Gaza. Massacres in the West Bank, massacres in Jerusalem, massacres in Lebanon. I could speak now for the next 5 hours about Israel's mass murdering, and they have gotten away with it. Not only are they never punished, they are endlessly rewarded. They are rewarded with money and guns, nuclear transfer of technology, diplomatic and political support, and a red carpet wherever their leaders go. And the people who are their victims are called the terrorists, and the actual terrorists are called the statesmen. Is Israel getting away with murder? That's one of my questions to you tonight. And the second one is this. Shiite worshippers in Saudi Arabia coming out of their mosque after preparations for the Ashura commemoration were gunned down by masked fanatic terrorists. Saudi Arabia blamed Al-Qaeda. Well, that's like me blaming my left hand for punching someone in the face. It wasn't my left hand that punched them in the face. It was me who punched them in the face. Saudi Arabia is Al-Qaeda. Saudi Arabia created Al-Qaeda, paid for Al-Qaeda, paid for their weapons, sent them to Afghanistan in the 1980s. Of course, they had a different name then. Then they were so-called Mujahideen. But it was Osama bin Laden and his lieutenants who mutated from those Afghan days into the people who destroyed the Twin Towers in New York, murdering more than 3,000 people. It was Al-Qaeda that has committed some of the most foul atrocities anywhere in the world. Saudi Arabia is Al-Qaeda, created Al-Qaeda, paid for Al-Qaeda, and continues to pay for Al-Qaeda. They can't wash their hands of a crime committed in their own country by blaming it on Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is them, is an alter ego of them. The mindset of Al-Qaeda and similar groupings like ISIS and others is emanating daily, hourly, out of Saudi Arabia. They have exported this mindset, this takfiri fanaticism, all over the world. And when it goes wrong, when an atrocity is committed, they want to point over there and say it was Al-Qaeda. Well, that just doesn't wash, at least not for me. So I'm asking you, how much do you blame Saudi Arabia for global takfirism? And if I put a comma in there, what's going to be done about it? After all, Iraq was invaded and occupied in part because it was being linked to international terrorism when it had no connection whatsoever to international terrorism. Had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. Quite the contrary. It had nothing to do with any international terrorism. But it was in part invaded and occupied on that charge. But Saudi Arabia is deeply involved in international terrorism. Not only is it not being attacked, invaded, occupied, it is a treasured friend, our best friend in the Arab Middle East. Let's take some calls. Arshad is in India on the Saudi Arabian question. Arshad, welcome to the show.
Hello, George.
Yes, hello, sir. Welcome.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you.
I want to say that Saudi Arabia is fully responsible for the global terrorism, takfirism rather. It's takfirism, it's being promoted as a form of ideology, and I feel that it's Saudi Arabia who's spreading, spending rather huge sum of money to spread this ideology. I can say that takfirism is a twisted, interpretation of Islam, which seeks to eliminate everyone who does not believe in their ideas. Rather, this is the reason we see Takfiri people behead innocent people in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and whatnot. Even people were killed in Saudi Arabia recently by these Takfiri personals, merely because they were commemorating the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. So I can say that all the acts of takfirism is un-Islamic, it is it's unauthentic, but Takfiri and rather I can say that Takfiri clerks branded it as a pure Islam, which it ironically I can say it's irony in itself. And killing of a person is being
Arshad, first of all, it's un-Islamic, and secondly, it's inhuman. I saw published the other day a price list from ISIS, a price list of women and children who were being sold as slaves, the widows and orphans of Muslims, Sunni Muslims, that ISIS had murdered in Iraq. They are raping people. They are mutilating people. They are murdering unarmed captives who are at their mercy, whether they are Sunni or Shia, Yazidi, Kurdish, Arabs, Christian, whatever they murder them. And then they sell their wives and their children around each other as if they were cattle, as if they were livestock. What's Islamic about this? What's human about this? And all of this emanates out of Saudi Arabia. The government in a dictatorship like Saudi Arabia cannot blame its citizens, its civil society, because there is no civil society in Saudi Arabia. The regime is everything. You couldn't set up a fishing club without the permission and the control of the Saudi Arabian regime. So if there is money going from citizens in Saudi Arabia to pay for this takfirism, the Saudi regime is responsible, has to take responsibility. Arshad, what do you say?
Exactly, yes. I feel that it's this Takfiri ideology which helps Saudi monarchs to remain in power. And this is the reason that Arabs spend huge chunk of money to promote this ideology. It's otherwise,
by the way, Arshad, even though they are absolute hypocrites, the last thing these people are is Wahhabis. If you saw how they behave in London, you'd know that it doesn't have much to do with the teaching of Abdul Wahhab. If you saw them in the casinos, if you saw them in the cocktail bars, if you saw them in the bordellos or in the markets for their hundreds of £1 million yachts, if you saw them sailing around the Mediterranean with their dancing girls, if you saw how they themselves belly dance for the Western leaders, who are not only not Muslim, but not even believers in God, the last thing you would actually call them is Wahhabis. Thanks for the call, Arshad. Doreen in Canada. I always like to hear from Doreen. Go ahead, Doreen.
Oh, hi, George. Good to speak to you again.
And you, go ahead, my dear.
All these years, George, how you have stuck by the Palestinians and helped them, and it just doesn't seem to stop, and nobody seems to help them. I thought there was a light at the end of the tunnel when the people were out in the streets protesting, and I was thinking of those little babies that had their heads blown off and everything else, and the media doesn't show that. It shows the beheadings of the people, of those journalists all the time, but it doesn't show those little babies in Palestine that was brutally murdered, and that is what's happening here. Every time I hear it's against international law, nothing is done by it. You see Ban Ki-moon going into Gaza saying this is disgraceful and against international law, but then what happens about it? Nothing happens, because all the prime ministers, presidents, or whatever heads of countries, they must have children, George, and they still support Israel, and they come out and say, we support Israel, even in the House of Commons. And then how can the world support children being murdered like that? It's not right, George. And then we you were talking about that boat, those 9 people were killed. What about the U.S. Liberty that in 1967, when 34 Marines lost their lives through Israel bombing their boat? That kind of stuff has just been declassified. And now we're learning about what happened there, where the President of the United States covered up that U.S. Liberty thing. So what can we do, George? I just want to know, I keep thinking there may be peace at the end of the tunnel, but it doesn't seem to be. They just keep going.
Well, Doreen, there will never be peace without justice. No justice, no peace. And the terms of justice for the Palestinian people are clear. First of all, they must get their country back. Second, those who've been driven out of their country and are living in exile as refugees or exile in different parts of the world, including in Canada, including in Britain, must have the right to return to their land. They must have the right to return to their home. They must have the right to live as equal citizens in a state which is accountable to them, a democratic state where Muslims and Christians and Jews can live as equal citizens under the law. That's why I support the idea of one state between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, which is a state in which every citizen lives equally. You're right that Israel is, as Dr. Norman Finkelstein called it, actually a lunatic state. It is like a lunatic which has broken out of the asylum and murders people at will around the world, and the world continues to support them. Let me give just one example, or I could be all night with you, Doreen. In Dubai, a Palestinian leader was murdered by a gang of 50 Israeli Mossad operators, every one of them traveling on a stolen passport belonging to friendly countries to Israel. The Mossad representative in London was deported, but on the return flight flew in the new Mossad representative, and he's now, presumably, still sitting in Kensington, in London, as the Mossad representative in Britain, even though that murder was carried out in part with stolen British passports. There is no crime that Israel can commit, it would seem, that will not bring the kind of accountability that would be normal with any other state. I mentioned Iraq earlier. Iraq was broken on the wheel of sanctions, invasion, and occupation for crimes it didn't actually even commit. There were no weapons of mass destruction. But Iraq was destroyed on the charge that there were weapons of mass destruction. But Israel has hundreds of weapons of mass destruction. Israel is occupying other people's land. It is carrying out massacres of people living under its military occupation. It is changing the demography of its occupied territories in absolute brazen defiance of international law which forbids such a thing. But the answer lies with us, Doreen. The Palestinian people can't do this on their own. Even the Arabs together are unlikely to be able to do it on their own, certainly with the political leadership that they currently have. But your country, Canada, and my country, Britain, are two of the main backers of these crimes committed by Israel. And we need to change public opinion in your country and in mine and in the United States and France and elsewhere, so that politicians can no longer write blank checks for the Israeli leadership. Doreen, it was great to hear from you again. Let's go to the UK and talk to Mo on the Saudi Arabian question. Mo, welcome.
Hi, George.
Hi there, sir. Go ahead.
I actually want to talk about Israel, if I may. George, we know Israel murdered that angel Rachel Corrie. Everyone saw the video or the YouTube of her when she was a 7-year-old child speaking so eloquently. So it's not surprising they're getting away with murder again, and it's the Turkish government that's not pursuing this. We can't blame the international court when the Turkish government is not actively pursuing justice for its own citizens. But the other factor is there is growing evidence that Mossad was responsible for downing of the Malaysian Airlines MH17 in Ukraine.
What's the evidence for that, Mo?
Well, there is growing evidence, which we can't discuss now, but there is growing evidence that it was Mossad behind that downing of the MH17.
I don't believe that myself, Mo. I've not seen any evidence, never mind growing evidence.
That's fair. I don't expect you to believe it now, but there is evidence that will become clear. But the other factor is that Israel has never had an interest in peace in Palestine.
That's for sure.
They are committing genocide. They want to frustrate people by either getting them to leave voluntarily the traditional lands of Palestine, or to finish them off in the final solution. We know Germany had a final solution, which was wrong, by the way, and the final solution for Palestine is wrong equally.
Well, I don't know if they have a final solution in mind. I'm certain that they don't intend and wouldn't be able to eliminate the Palestinian people in the way that Nazism, fascism tried to eliminate the Jews. But you make a couple of very good points in your call, and I want to deal with two of them. The American government did not require justice for Rachel Corrie. The British government did not require justice for Tom Herndon, another of the brave international volunteers who was killed, mown down, in Rachel's case with a bulldozer, deliberately killing her and reversing back over her. In the case of Tom, shot in the head when he was protecting small children in Gaza. The facts are, neither the British government nor the American government held Israel to account for this crime. Turkey has not held Israel to account for its 9 citizens. It's made a lot of noise, a bit of bluster, but it's business as usual between Turkey and Israel. Their diplomatic relations have been restored. Their military maneuvers and relationship has been restored and reinforced. So you've got a point. How can you expect the International Criminal Court, the war crimes prosecutors, to pursue a case that none of the governments involved really want to pursue? Very good couple of points. Another of my favorite callers is on the line from Portugal. Christina, welcome back. Go ahead.
Hello, George.
Hello.
George, this is rather interesting. Jordan has withdrawn its ambassador to Israel today, I believe.
Yes, but I don't know for how long, Christina, but I'm glad they did that, yeah.
And Sweden has recognised Palestine.
Yeah.
And the British government voted...
Not the government, the parliament.
Yeah. Okay, the parliament, they voted theoretically, although non-binding, to recognise Palestine. So I think these are good steps in the right direction. And I rather fancy, given the vote of no confidence in Barack Obama in the American elections, I fancy that Israel is slightly going out of fashion.
Well, that's absolutely correct, Christina. Israel is massively out of fashion on the streets, amongst public opinion, around the world. And even some governments are beginning to move under that public pressure. But too slowly, too haltingly, and entirely reversibly. For example, if Obama goes in 2 years and Hillary Clinton comes in, trust me, in the US, Israel will be back in fashion. We'll discuss this further in just 3 minutes from now. God willing, I'll be here when you get back after the news. Welcome back to Comment with me, George Galloway, here on Press TV. Still the voice of the voiceless, and the voiceless are calling in to give voice to their opinions on the two questions that I have posed. I attended, it was one of the most melancholy experiences of my life. I attended the funerals of many of the martyrs of the Mavi Marmara in Istanbul. I helped to bury them, and I had to embrace the sons of those who were being buried. They were murdered on the high seas in an act of piracy by the armed forces of what they call Israel. It was as clear and obvious a crime as it's possible to imagine. It was broadcast around the entire world, and it took place in international waters. So there was no doubt about it. But prosecutors for the War Crimes Tribunal this week decided that Israel would not be prosecuted after all by them for that crime. So I'm asking the simple question: is Israel getting away with murder? And secondly, in the wake of the gunning down of people, worshippers coming out of a mosque in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, where they had been beginning the commemoration of Ashura, and the killers wearing masks were said by the Saudi regime to be Al-Qaeda. Not them. They have no responsibility for it. They wash their hands of it. It was Al-Qaeda. I've laid out my views. I'm asking you, how much do you blame Saudi Arabia for the proliferation of this takfirism around the world? Mrs. Hussein is on the line to talk about just that. Mrs. Hussein, welcome to the show.
Ji, salam alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Welcome. Go ahead.
Yes, how are you, George?
By the grace of God, I'm good, madam.
Okay. So what I was asking, how much do you blame Saudi Arabia for global takfiris? Of course, 200%. You see, the last month was the month of Hajj. There were about 2 million people in Hajj. And this year and every year, there are about 25 million Zaireen, I mean the pilgrims in Karbala and Najaf. So now you can judge the takfiri one way, takfiri and Saudi, and the other way Shias and Imam Hussein. Okay. Then the whole world can judge who is fair, who is not fair. Because if one Shia kill one Haji in Hajj during Hajj, so you don't know what Shia will Shia will suffer for that. But now the takfiri, the Al-Qaeda and Saudi, you can not, Saudi is not different than takfiri. Saudi is not different than ISIL. Saudi and ISIL and takfiri are the same. And they are killing Shias, and they are killing Shias every year in Muharram and Arba'in in Karbala and Najaf. So the whole world can judge who is fair-minded, who is not. Either they will support Saudi Arabia and the Shias and the Sunnis, of course, in Iraq, who are suffering because of the takfiri. So my question is that, shall we blame that Saudi Arabia is responsible for the takfirism, one thing. And the recent most news is that recently there are 2,000 madrasa, sorry George, 2,000 madrasa in Pakistan, only in Punjab area. They are financing takfiri, they are financing and they are teaching them and giving them. That's why you can't finish takfiris. How can we finish takfirism or not, George? That is my last question.
Well, Madam, as always, very eloquently put. There is no doubt that many of these madrasas, many of these mosques around the world are funded by Saudi Arabia, and they must toe what purports to be the Saudi Arabian line on Islam, which is, of course, sectarian, against Shiites, It is utterly contemptuous of peoples of other faith. It is utterly reactionary towards women. And it is pursuing the political, logical consequences of this mindset of, where they can, killing people from minority faiths, from minority sects within Islam, and anyone who stands up to their takfiri interpretation of Islam. But here's a very important point, Mrs. Hussain. These people murder and massacre Sunni Muslims. When they lined up 54 Iraqis in western Iraq just a few days ago and murdered them in public in front of the whole town, every one of those was a Sunni. But he was a Sunni who disagreed with the takfiri fanatics of ISIL. They have murdered thousands of Sunni Muslims in Syria. They have murdered imams, they have murdered muftis, they have murdered the children of muftis. They have destroyed tombs of the Sahaba. They have desecrated the graves of the prophets. The prophet Jonah, for example, they filmed themselves destroying his tomb just the other month and put it out on YouTube like it was a good thing, disturbing the bones of prophets. In Syria, they destroyed the tomb and threw the bones around of one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. A man who had kissed the cheek of the Prophet had his bones kicked around in a tomb by these people. So we should avoid the temptation to imagine that the only targets of these takfiris are people from the Shia community or other religious minorities, Christians, Yazidis, and so on. Anybody who disagrees with them is subject to murder, massacre, mutilation. And that's why we have to unite against them. And the Saudis are paying for it all. They created it in the first place. And I don't believe for 1 second that the crime that was committed the other day against the worshippers coming out of the mosque in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, I don't believe for 1 second that the Saudi regime was not somehow involved in that crime. Patrick is on the line. He's in the UK on the subject of Israel getting away with murder. Patrick, is it?
Assalamu alaikum, George. Yes, it is indeed. A Red Cross volunteer was told to step away from his volunteer comrades. He was told to light a cigarette lighter outstretched, with his arm outstretched, and the Israeli Defense Force soldiers shot him dead there and then. It is getting away with murder, and the West spend a huge amount of time not only justifying that singular crime, but they also appear to spend a huge amount of time justifying all these crimes. Rachel Corrie, Tom Herdnell, and all those children have been murdered by Israel, and the West appear to be justifying it by its shameless lack of action.
Well, I think that's right, Patrick. And our country is amongst the leading proponents of exculpating Israel from its crimes. And as you're British and I am, let's take a moment to remember that this is the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, so 97 years ago. Our country was responsible for authoring this entire disaster that has overcome the Palestinian people and spilled over into the Arab world as a whole, and indeed throughout the Muslim Ummah. our country promised a second people the land which belonged to a third people, them. It was their land, and we gave it away to European Zionists who wanted to create a settler state somewhere, a European colony. They were ready to do it in the Seychelles, in Uganda, in Patagonia, in many other places. Didn't matter to them where they did it. All they wanted from the British was a piece of land on which they, the Zionists, could establish a European colony. And it was we who made it possible. And the United States that continues to make it possible. So we have to approach this not just with a certain humility, but with an even greater level of determination, because our country is shamed by that act and by many acts since. Patrick, thanks for the call. Let's go to Mahmoud in London on Saudi Arabia and Takfirism. Mahmoud, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George, and good evening to all your viewers.
Thank you.
In relation with the two questions this evening, I think they're both part and parcel of the same subject, as it were, because Saudi Arabia obviously is part and parcel again of the Zionist ideology, together, of course, with the English and the Americans. And they will do, i.e. Saudi Arabia will do and carry out any act that they're told to do. And with reference to Israel, I would say obviously it's the same, because they wouldn't do what they have been doing or what they will carry on doing unless the English and the Americans tell them to stop. But having said that, the popularity of Israel as a whole is diminishing gradually due to the change of philosophy that I dare say we are about to see in the Middle East and beyond. What are your views in relation to Israel's popularity now?
Oh, I think that Israel's popularity is at an all-time low. I became involved in this question in 1975, which is a long time ago, and I can tell you that we could have fitted in 1975 all the supporters of the Palestinian cause in this studio, all of them in Britain. But now we are millions, maybe tens of millions, certainly tens of millions, who recognize that the injustice suffered by the Palestinians is the central problem in the Middle East, and that unless some modicum of justice is afforded to the Palestinians, there will be no peace there. And if there's no peace there, there's very unlikely to be any peace anywhere else. But governments, even though they hate Netanyahu, and we have recent evidence again of this, with the on-the-record briefings by US administration officials about the true feelings of the Obama administration towards Netanyahu's government. We saw from the horse's mouth a few years ago Obama and then President Sarkozy of France discussing Netanyahu as a liar and a deceiver, and how they couldn't bear to look upon his face. That's the true feelings of the politicians in Western countries, but they don't act on it. They continue to act in defense of this country and its leadership that they privately despise and hate. And we have to, it's like jump-starting a car. We have to put these wires together. We have to connect the public opinion in Western countries to the public policy of our governments. And that's what I'm working for, and what everyone else watching this should be working for too. Great call, Mahmoud. Ali is in Norwich on the Saudi Arabian Takfiri question. Ali, welcome to the show.
Hello, Mr. Mr. Galloway. One way to understand what is happening to the Muslims is to not just to look at the present, but to look at the past, specifically the fall of the Muslim patrons, the Ottoman Empire, 1299 to 1923. Now, towards the end of the Ottoman Empire and the defeat of the Ottoman Turks in World War I and its disintegration, hence the loss of Palestine, the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire backed by Britain, hence the loss of notably Saudi Arabia and the Arab lands under the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement. Then the Balfour Declaration 1917, which promised support for the Jewish national homeland in Palestine. Defeat by Italy and the loss of Libya, loss of Bosnia-Herzegovina to Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the loss of life and expulsion of millions of Muslims from Balkans, the despicable Lawrence of Arabia, etc., etc. It's about rise, stagnation, decline, and subsequent defeat of the Ottoman Empire and its remnant today, Turkey, which will clarify many issues. The coming to power of Ataturk and the humiliating defeat and the capitulation of the Ottoman Empire, i.e. the patrons and the protectorates of the Muslim Ummah. Now, after the fall of the Ottomans, everybody was left to fend for themselves. Now, Ataturk imposed on Turkey Western secular reforms, or de-Islamization. Ataturk imposed Western value systems, ban hijab, changed the Arabic alphabet to Latin alphabet, Western clothing, arts, education, Western judicial system, complete defeat and capitulation, integration and assimilation. Now, Turkey is a NATO member. That means a Muslim country has to defend Christian countries at the time of war. Complete humiliation and subjugation. Turkey, Saudi Arabia are Islamic countries ruled by at best hypocrites and at worst unbelievers. Now, if I may just quickly, I'm near the end. Quran chapter 4, verse 138 says, بشير المنافقين بأن لهم عذابا أليما الذين يتخذون الكافرين أولياء من دون المؤمنين. Inform the hypocrites that they will have a painful punishment. Those who ally themselves with the disbelievers instead of believers. Now, to conclude, I have good news for brothers and sisters. In our lifetime, we saw the fall of the Soviet Union. We are now seeing the fall of capitalism and U.S. hegemony. The answer is pure Islam and to unite. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. There's too much in that I disagree with for me at this hour to embark upon a comprehensive disagreement. But there was much in it that I agreed with also. We'll have to address some of the points that you've made in subsequent shows. But the defeat of the Ottoman Empire became inevitable when the Ottomans allied with the German and Austro-Hungarian Axis in World War I. But it only collapsed because it was rotten to the core. All it needed was a push, and that push certainly came. And it collapsed because it was rotten, not because it was necessarily defeated. The Turkish forces were very strong in World War I. But the empire had become rotten to the core. And it was entirely impractical to imagine that Bosnia-Herzegovina or Palestine or even more, Arabia, Iraq, would forever be ruled by a sultan behind the Sublime Porte in Istanbul. That's an entirely ludicrous idea. As time moved on, the idea that people should choose their own government democratically, accountably, became an idea whose time had come. And the Ottoman Empire could not possibly have survived. Never mind perfidious Albion, never mind the treachery of Lawrence, never mind the victory of the Allied forces in the First World War, if victory it was. The Ottoman Empire collapsed under the weight of the contradictions of the idea of an empire. An empire is very last century, very 2 centuries ago. Nobody will accept being a subject of an empire ruled by a sultan that they didn't choose, living behind a sublime port anywhere. Ali, a very, very interesting call. Last call, though, is in Nigeria. Tijari, I think, or Tijani, is Israel getting away with murder? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. Go ahead.
Yeah, God give me the grace, continuing your job to humanity. And my condolences to all shares of Imam Hussein that were martyred.
I'm sorry, brother. The line is too bad. Nobody can hear you. It's my old adversary and friend, Aidan, in London. Go ahead quickly, Aidan.
Hi, George. God bless you. Thanks for having me back. So,
welcome, anytime.
Yeah. If the Zionist state is unable to be, is unable to get prosecuted, I mean, it's been found guilty of war crimes, but no prosecution will take place afterwards. What does that mean then? I mean, is that the new law? Is that the new law in the world now? I mean,
well, what they actually said, Aidan, was that they weren't going to prosecute because there weren't enough people killed. Not enough gravity.
Right, but there was a previous case that they used in Sudan where 10 UN soldiers were killed by an African gang, and the ICC managed to successfully prosecute them as a war crime.
Yeah.
And that was the case used, actually, to try and, by the Turkish lawyer, to prosecute the Mavi Marmara case.
Yes.
So there's actually an identical case there where they successfully prosecuted him, where they successfully prosecuted them, but on this account, they couldn't prosecute them.
Well, the answer to that, Aidan, is known by you, and known by me, and known by our viewers, but it needs to be known by everyone. And it is this, that there is one law for Israel and another law for everyone else. And until we change that paradigm, until Israel is held to account for its crimes in the way that other people would be held to account for their crimes, we ain't going anywhere. And Aidan, you and I will be old men still talking about it. It's been marvellous.
Hello, just comment the name of the person with that number. And just make sure that your television volume set to 0. So 0, 0. Can you spell your name for me? Yeah, I know. You redirect me through the phone number and then we'll call you back. Comment. And then can I have your telephone number? Okay, so